On Kiad Chaintoretta, Niall McCullough from McCullough Mulvin Architects, again, no strangers to Kilkenny City.
Like my colleagues, I've been lucky enough to have an opportunity to work in the city in the last couple of years. And if anything, what I've been doing in working is digging down, digging into the city and looking at it in detail. And I suppose just what I'd like to talk about is when you dig down and you look at the city in detail, I think ideas come to you. And ideas about what you might do about the Diageo site come to you as well. I think the site has everything going for it. It's got linkage to the city. It's got historic character. It's got St. Francis on it. It's got the river. It's also got scale, which most sites or addenda to cities don't actually have. It's potentially a key to unlock the rest of the city. It's big enough to have a wider influence beyond the city. This is something that could be looked at abroad in the rest of Ireland. What you do here is something that I think will be of greater importance. And in terms, I want to talk about ideas about the city, first of all. And if you go back, as some of my colleagues have done, just very quickly, you've got an inland city without the sea, very unusual in Ireland, without dramatic landscape. So people make landscapes of buildings. They make landscapes of towers. They make landscapes of castles. That's true of the whole county. And secondly, as we mentioned before, the river, and if you look at this overall plan of the current city, much, much enlarged, and you see the old city in the center of it, the river is threaded right through it. And the character of the river and the open nature of the river and its beautiful relationship with the existing city is still intact. And that's something that I think is extremely important and very closely regarded by most people. And also when you look at old images of the city, you get this sense that people all through history have understood that relationship with the city and that they've built their monuments. They've built this image of the city on the river to be seen with the green space in front of it. And just other ideas, which is the city itself, again, has been alluded to, the streets and the lanes, is not a haphazard event. It's an idea. It was designed as a city with the castle, facing the cathedral, the other churches, the city walls, the rectangle, and the river. Somebody thought that out, and it's been added to over time. It's a cultural and intellectual object, not something to be just frittered away or wasted away. And if you go close by, again, Edinburgh has been mentioned. You get this great view of Edinburgh Castle, and when you put Edinburgh and Kilkenny together, you get this very interesting understanding of cities in this part of the world, where you get this kind of extended town plan between castles and cathedrals, and the town extended between them. And just as an example, when you see what happened in Edinburgh in the 18th century, when they extended the old traditional city on the hill, they built themselves a completely new city across a green space. And it had an idea about it. It was this wonderful, rational opposition to all the little narrow medieval lanes. And the city of Edinburgh grew entirely on this duality between the two things. And the only point I take out of that is that's not going to happen in Kilkenny because the Diageo site is right beside the city, is that whatever happens should have its own integrity and should have its own idea about what it is. And if you go to the site itself close up and you actually start to dig down on it, beyond generalities, and you start to nose around the actual details of it, it has all that layering and all that character of the rest of the city writ small. And if you go back to Roke's map in the 18th century, you can see the field boundaries, you can see the garden plots that have been mentioned before, you can see the outline of St. Francis, the wall is there, the old city wall runs down right through the site. And those traces are still there under the tarmac of the Diageo site. They're not gone away. So I suppose in some ways they might be a generation or the bones of a generation of an idea about what you might do. It's got big bone scale and long distance views. It's got this wonderful close relationship with the rest of the city. You can vanish down a lane here and be lost down in the new site. Just think of all the potential drama and excitement and mystery of just wandering off down that. It's also got the Friary itself, which is actually a wonderful monument. And I think one of the things that should be done actually, as one of the earlier aspects of this, is actually to properly excavate that site while time actually allows that to happen. So if you actually look at it in detail and you start to close in on what would happen here, I think there are certain things which become very clear. The river is going to have to be very clearly highlined in it. The city wall along the river, the site of the abbey, and then the relationship between the existing city and the site, and also the way that the new road, which comes into it, the exact way that that's knitted in, particularly when it comes up closer to the cathedral, to make the truth of its urban character manifest is going to have to be very carefully designed, so that it doesn't feel like a large through route with a few houses on both sides of it. That area that I've circled there, I think, is a particular focus of interest and discussion. And in the wider context, again, that whole issue widens out to the whole city. Whatever happens here has ramifications with regard to the view of the castle, the view of the Evans home across the river, the view of the cathedral. What you do here will impact on those monuments, and those monuments can actually impact on what's happening on the site. And I think there are a number of ways that development could go here, and like Tony, I'd agree, it's not the time for discussing the detail of that, but I think you could start to think, if you take the circles on the image there, the relationship between the new road and the city, the way that that's knitted in, the back of the existing old city and the new development is a place for small and intense urban places, which are kind of a crossover zone between the new and the old. The site of the Friary itself, which again I think is sitting like a large fact in the middle of this, and is maybe needs more thought about it and its consequences and its width and the extent of buildings that I would imagine are actually under the ground on that, could have a square in front of it down to the river, and maybe the space in it could be open space or could actually be built over. But it should be recognized in the morphology of what happens later. And then extending that to the rest of the city, maybe you could think about a grander kind of a scenography, where you built, as Tony was saying, a whole quay down to the river. You completed the medieval city, and maybe you match the castle by a large public building up beyond the new bridge on the other side, something that creates a whole character to that grand vista. Or you could go back, I think, to the view of the river again, and back to this image of faith in this green thread that runs through it, and just think of it a slightly different way, which wouldn't be hugely different in terms of the increment of development. But instead of thinking of this extension to the city, I'm thinking of Diageo and the car park site adjacent to it as simply filling in down to the river. That you thought of the development as something which was actually attached to the old city, which was almost like the end of it or the back of it, which was built up quite densely, with then buildings standing in more open ground, running down to the river. And I think that in many ways the discussion and the debate about this as it develops will be precisely about the size of that green increment, precisely about how much of that is left, or how wide or how narrow that actually ends up being. So thank you.